Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode from the RPA Vanguard channel. My name is Andy Menon. In this video, we are going to be talking about how to override global asset values in the UiPath Orchestrator. Let's get started. I'm in my working instance of the UiPath tenant here. And although I'm expecting the audience to be familiar with the concept of assets, it's required to demonstrate how we create an asset under normal circumstances, right? So here I am in this tenant, and under the tenant, there is this folder, my modern folder. This is where I usually operate. And every folder has got the assets feature, right? And to normally create an asset, we go to add asset, and there is the ability for us to create an entirely new asset or link one from the other folders. We are going to be concentrating on how to create a new asset within the scope of this modern folder, basically the folder that you see here highlighted on the left. So to create an asset, I go to create a new asset. And then I would add an asset name. I would select the type and I would give it a description. And then the point of focus here would be the asset value section, right? And here by default, the global value slider is set to on, right? So we normally don't fudge with that. We just leave it unchanged, and then we set the value of the asset. Obviously, we have selected the asset type to be text, and the name of the asset is my global asset name. So what I'm going to do is set a value here. And then we create the asset if we think that we are all set, and we save our asset creation. Now, this is normally how most of us are used to creating an asset, right? We have an asset name and we have the asset value. And then in our automations, right, when we deploy an automation to this folder, we have the capability in our automation projects to access this asset value, right? We usually use the get asset value or the get asset activity, to be precise, to fetch an asset by name, right? So the name of the asset is my global asset name. And then when we retrieve an asset with this name, the value of that asset is fetched, in which case it's called my global asset value, and stored in a local variable. And based on the purpose of that asset, your automation will use that asset value to perform certain business logic, right? So this is a normal scheme of things. Now, this asset value is global to this folder, right? So any automation that is deployed to this folder will have access to this asset, right? And they can use this asset to serve the purposes of the business logic. But here's the catch. The purpose of this asset, as its name suggests, is global to all automations. Basically, all the automations will read the asset value and perform the business logic based on this value here that is applicable across the board for all automations. There really is no way to change the behavior of the automation based on this value, right? At least not in a straightforward way, right? So what is it that we need to do to make this a little more versatile, a bit more advanced, so that we can deploy all automations to this folder, and at the same time, based on some of the conditions under which the automation operates, we change the behavior of that automation based on a changing value of this asset, right? So this asset value will not remain constant, but will change based on certain conditions, right? And that process is achieved by overriding the global asset values, right? We'll take a look at that next. Before we go about overriding global asset values, it's important to understand how this has been set up. Obviously, for the purposes of this video, there is a specific setup that I've used. Your setup may be similar or might be different, but it is important to understand what the circumstances are under which we will be overriding a global asset value, right? So I am here in my tenant and I'm navigating to the folders, and I have created a folder named asset overrides specifically for this demo. It doesn't have to be named asset overrides, but it talks about the topic of this video, and that's why I've given it that name. Your folder obviously can be different. And under the folder, we have two users. One user is, of course, the support admin of this tenant, right? This is the local admin and also has full permissions to this folder. Then what I have done is I have invited an other user named admin from a different orchestrator tenant who is also part of our domain to be an automation user on this tenant. And both these users have been added to this modern folder. So which means that both these users will have access to the automation and the assets deployed to this asset overrides folder, right? And in this folder, if I go into the contents of this folder, this folder is having its own dedicated package feed, and I've kept that isolated for the purposes of this demo because it's also possible for you to have package feeds from the global tenant scope. But what I have done here is that this particular modern folder has got its own package feed, which means that if you are going to be deploying processes to your folder, this modern folder, then the packages have to be uploaded to this isolated package feed, right? And then as you can see, I have an automation package uploaded here, and it has been converted into a process, and it's called the parts list shipper, right? The name of this automation will become clear when we step into the use case scenario in my demo further down this video. But for now, let it be noted that this automation is called the parts list shipper, right? Therefore, both the users that I showcased earlier will have access to execute this automation, right? Now, what's different in this case is that both users can execute the same automation. The automation has got access to the assets that have been deployed in this folder. But what's going to happen is those asset values are going to change based on which named user's robot is executing the automation, right? And that's where the concept of overriding global asset values comes into play, right? So now that we have taken a look at the folder and the automation setup, let's go take a look at the use case scenario first. All right, so now let's look at the use case scenario that I have created for the purposes of this demo. And it would be easier to understand the concept of overriding global asset values based on this fictitious scenario that I have created. So what you're seeing here is a slide of a manufacturing and shipping facilities that has been created where automations are playing some kind of a role in the entire product manufacturing system, right? So here we have three manufacturing facilities, right? There is the main facility here in red, and I have assigned it the name main facility with the acronym MF. And then there would be secondary facilities that would manufacture parts to be supplied to the main factory, right, or the main facility. And we'll be working with just two facilities for keeping this very simple. So we have the main facility and we have the second facility called Unit B, right? And in both cases, the manufacturing facility manufactures one kind of a part and the Unit B manufactures another kind of a part, right? And therefore they generate their own part numbers, right? So there is a kind of process that generates a part number. We all know that if you look at any product in your household or your cars, there's always a part number on those on that part, as well as its components, to identify where that part originated from, right? Generally, that's the case. So every facility generates its own part numbers. Now, the facility has got robot machines executing under the named user account, right? In the main facility, it's the admin user account. In the Unit B, it is the support named user account, right? Now, the robots are in one or the other way involved in handling the part list that is generated for that day. Let us say if on day one today, you are manufacturing 100 parts at manufacturing facility A, and 100 part numbers have been generated, right? And all the part numbers have to be listed in a file through an automation, and then it has to be shipped off to your central orchestrator storage facility, right? So all the automations that are running across these manufacturing facilities are orchestrated from the orchestrator tenant, right? And what these automations do is they take these part numbers and they ship it to the orchestrator storage bucket, right? Now, herein lies the difference. The manufacturing facility produces one kind of a part, and their parts have got one kind of naming style, right? When the part number is generated, it has to be named a certain way. And then Unit B manufactures another kind of part, and it has its own way of naming the parts, part numbers. Now, that's important because you need to be able to track the part numbers back to the facility from where the part originated. But at the end of the day, both part list files that are generated for that day are actually shipped up to the orchestrator. And then there might be another process that would go into the storage bucket and then read those files containing the part numbers and then process them downstream. Now, this is out of the scope of discussion. We're not going to look at this part of it. We are going to be concentrating on the parts number generator and the circumstances under which these two automations run. And then finally, when these two automations actually push all the part numbers up to the orchestrator, we look at the differences between how the robot at the main facility executed the automation and compare that with the same automation that's been executed by the robot at Unit B, and then compare the two results to see how the global asset values that were overridden, right, in the orchestrator played a role in making the same automation work under different circumstances, right? So now that we have this scenario, let's go back into the orchestrator to see how those assets have been created. We are back in the orchestrator and the modern folder asset overrides, and I will go into the assets section. And here I have many number of assets created with their descriptions, the types, but what you're going to be seeing that's different from a global asset is the value section of the asset shows a generic description that states value per user, right? It does not say specifically what the value of that asset is, right? If you compare that to the asset that we created at the beginning of this video, if I go into my modern folder and look at the asset, it has a definitive value, right? So what's different, right? What's the difference between this global asset and an overridden asset that you are seeing in this folder? So I'm going to be creating a new asset just to show you how that's possible. But we are not going to be using that in this automation because the automation has already been deployed and they already make use of these four assets, which is enough for our demonstration today, right? So as usual is the case, we go in and say create a new asset. And I am going to create something called my overridden asset. And I'm going to give it, let's say, text, right? So here comes the fun part. We are not going to be putting a text value in here. We are not, right? The reason for that is, let us say I put in a value. Right? That value is going to be of no consequence because we are going to be sliding the global value slider to the off position. See, when you do that, right, this text value is disabled, right? And now what we have to do is we have to complete the configuration of this asset by clicking on this button here, add robot asset value, right? Because otherwise this asset is not going to be saved. So what I do is I click this add robot asset value button and immediately a section becomes visible, right? And what we have to do now is provide the username, the named user, and optionally the machine name and the asset value. Note that the user and the asset value are mandatory, but specifically note the username, right? We are going to come back to this at the end of this video, right? So the username is mandatory, the machine name is not. So when I click on the drop down, you can see that I have the two users, the admin user and the support user, who have been added to this folder. And they're the only two named users that have access to this folder, right? So what I do is I select the support user first because the support user is the main admin of this tenant. So I want to go in that hierarchy. And then what I do is optionally you can add the machine, but that's not required because as long as you're logged in as support at the account name from any machine, you should be able to run this automation from this folder, right? I'm going to put in support user, right? Support user robot. Now, once you have provided it the mandatory values, you will be able to save this asset value. Next, I click this button again. This time, I am going to click on admin, right? And I'm going to assign a different asset value for admin. I'm going to say admin robot, right? So this is how you will override global asset values, right, in your UiPath Orchestrator. Basically, both these users have got access to this asset named my overridden asset, right? But they will not be using the global value because as you can see, we have slid the global value slider to the off position. The my asset value, the general text value or the global text value is of no use, right? Instead, what's going to happen is when the automation executes under the named user account support, and if that automation is going to access this asset called my overridden asset, then the value that is going to be retrieved by that automation at that point in time is going to be the value support user robot. Similarly, if the robot from the admin facility or the main facility is running the automation and tries to access this asset and retrieves the value that's going to be retrieved is admin robot, right? So now that you have configured the what you might call the user specific values, you have overridden the asset values, you will be allowed to create these assets, or this asset rather. So to complete the creation process, we hit create. And here you can see that the value has been set to value per user. That means that this asset has been assigned different values based on the named user account that's executing the automation, right? In the next section, what we'll be doing is we'll go into the automations part of it, and we will review the parts list shipper automation, understand how it works. And then we will be running this automation under two different named users and going to compare the end results. So this is the automation that's going to simulate our use case that was demonstrated in the PowerPoint slide a few minutes ago. Now, obviously, I do not have a manufacturing facility here that's going to, manufacture parts and, originate different part numbers. So we have to simulate something similar, right? So that's what this process does, right? And one of the first actions that it does is it has a sequence that will load assets from the orchestrator folder, right? That have been configured in that modern folder, right? To summarize the assets, I'm going to switch screens because it's difficult to actually click on each of them to show you the values. So I'm going to cut to the chase, and I'm going to bring up this slide here. And I have configured, 4 assets. And here are the values that have been assigned to the support robot and the admin robot, right? We have something called the part number length. I'll come to what each of them means. There's a value of 8, and it has a value of 4 for the admin robot. The part number type will be minor, in which case the part numbers are all going to be in lowercase. And the admin robot's facility is going to generate part numbers that are major, meaning they're all going to be in uppercase, right? It's obvious because the main facility manufactures a major part, whereas the support facility, the unit B facility, manufactures a minor part, right? And then what are the parts per batch, right? The support unit is going to be manufacturing 5 parts per batch. And then the admin robot is going to be manufacturing about 25. And finally, the unit name, right? What is the unit name from where these parts are originating, right? As we saw in that PowerPoint slide, the secondary facility is called Unit B. So I have given it the acronym UB. And the primary facility is the main facility, right? And I have given it the acronym MF, right? So what are these related to? These are related to how the part numbers are generated. Obviously, I don't have a part generator here. So what we'll be doing is we will be actually going to the online GUID generator site, and these automations are going to generate part numbers from the site, right? So when I run this automation, the automations are going to come in, and then based on the asset values that have been given to them, they will generate the part numbers, right? For example, if I go into this slide, if the support robot is going to be executing this automation, it has been told that it has to generate 5 parts, right? In which case it's going to come in here and going to assign the value of 5. And then it has been told that it has to generate minor part number types. That means all lowercase, right? So it will set the uppercase checkbox to disabled, right? Basically, it'll uncheck the uppercase box, which is by default enabled. And then it is going to click on this button, right? And then the next couple of steps in the process are going to be executed by the automation. We'll get to that, but what the steps are going to do is basically they're going to look at how what is the unit name, and then going to add that unit name to that part number, and then based on the length of the part number, right, it is going to take the first 8 characters or the first 4 characters, right, and then append them to the unit name, right? So it's going to be unit B dash an 8-character part number, and because you have said that it is all minor, it will all be converted to lowercase, right? It's already converted to lowercase in the parts generator, but I'm just trying to emphasize that. And then it is going to write all those part numbers in a file name, and even the file names are going to be named a certain way that we'll look at when we get to the automations, right? So 4 assets that you see here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, each of them specified for distinct 2 users that have access to this automation, and the automation that's going to run or is going to be run by these two named user accounts is the parts list shipper, right? So now that we know how the asset name, the automation, and the parts list generator is going to work, let's jump into the automation. So the first thing that it does is it goes into this sequence, and it loads those asset values by name. So this is pretty standard. It is going to use the get asset activity, and going to load unit name, part number type, the length of the parts, and the parts per batch. And all of those are actually returned as output arguments, right? So 4 output arguments are going to be returned to main, and then they're going to be logged here for us to look at in the console. And the next thing it's going to do is it's going to originate the part numbers. This is where the UI part of the automation is going to come in, and then the arguments that are going to be passed to it are the outputs from the previous step. So here is the application URL, and here are the specifications of the part number, right? Basically, what is the type of part number, what is the length of the part number, what are the number of part numbers you have to generate, right? In case of the support robot, it's, I think, 5. In case of the main facility, it's just 25. And then what's the unit name, right? And what's going to happen is the automation is going to automate the GUID generator application that you just saw. It's going to create those parts and then going to apply the logic based on the asset values, right? So if I open this sequence, so we open up the GUID generator application, and then we start automating the sequence. I'm not going to get into too much detail. This is pretty obvious. It's going to type the number of parts it needs, and then based on whether the part number is major or minor, it's going to uncheck or check the uppercase checkbox, and then it's going to generate those GUIDs, and then it's going to copy them to the clipboard, right? And then it's going to have a short delay after it copies the values, and then it's going to retrieve all the values that it added to the clipboard using the get list from clipboard activity. And then it is going to do the post processing. Basically, here it is going to process each of these part numbers that it retrieved and split them into an array. And then it's going to loop through each of these part numbers in the array. And then it is going to apply the asset value specifications that it retrieved from the orchestrator folder. So in this case, it's going to take that entire part number, which is a huge GUID, right? And then it's going to reduce the size of that and also prefix the unit name. So here is the unit name plus a hyphen, and then it's going to take a substring of that part number, right? So in case of unit, the support unit, it's going to be UB, which is the unit B hyphen, then the 5-character part number, right? And you will see it's going to become clear once we execute this, and it's going to generate that part number and then output it to the output parts list, right? And then it's going to close the application, right? So what's output from this automation or this sequence in the automation will be the output parts list, right? And it's going to be a string of concatenated values, right? So this is where the behavior of the automation is going to change based on which named user is going to execute the automation. The support automation is going to produce parts one way, the admin automation is going to produce it in a different way, right? So now that it has output the values, we go back to the main flow. And here we have a debug window that's going to list the parts that have been generated. The next step is to save these parts into a parts file. And obviously the inputs to this, again, are going to be some asset values, the specifications of the asset, and of course the parts list, right? And here we are not going to put in all the asset names. All it needs is the unit name and the number of parts per batch. And then it's going to take this entire parts list and deposit it in a text file, right? So if I open this workflow, so when it comes into this sequence build parts file, what it's going to do is it's going to generate an absolute file path. Basically, it's the current project name and the data folder and the name of the file. Now, what's going to be the name of the file? The name of the file is going to be the facility underscore the number of parts generated. In this case, it's 10 or 25 or whatever that is. And then parts list followed by the timestamp, right? It's that simple. So the unit identifier is going to come from the asset. The number of parts that are generated per batch are going to come from the asset. And then the rest of it is automatically generated and appended in this expression, right? So if we look at this, it says directory dot get current directory / data, the unit name dash the parts count dash, everything else is going to be a standard expression, right? And now that it knows what the file name and the file path is, it's going to simply dump the parts list into that file, right? And that is how you see all of these parts or part list files have been generated under this data folder, right? Simple. Now the last step would be for the for this process to complete is to deposit this parts file that it has generated at the central repository location, right? And if we come back to this folder under asset overrides, there is the storage bucket, and I have created a repository called parts list repository. And obviously all the automations that are executing under this folder have access to that storage bucket, or rather all the named users who have access to this folder have access to this storage bucket, and all those parts are going to be deposited here in this storage repository, right? And that's a simple step. So if we go back and get into this location or this flow, here it is. It gets the name of the file, and then it gives it the destination of the storage bucket. Then it's the full path of this file here on the local disk, and then the name of the storage bucket. Obviously, that's going to be passed in as an input argument, and it's set as parts list repository, right? And the orchestrator folder name is asset overrides. All right, so it's time to demonstrate this whole thing in action. What I have done is cleaned up everything to have a clean run. Here on the orchestrator side, you can see the orchestrator storage bucket is completely empty. There's nothing in here. The automation has been deployed to this folder like I mentioned before. But here's the difference. I am logged in as the support admin user on this tenant. So if I click on the green beacon here, it shows that I am on this tenant, RPA Vanguard support service. And what is different here is the name of the user, right? Here it says RPA Vanguard LLC support. Please note this because when I log in with the admin user, that is going to change, right? Okay, so the next step for us is to simply run this automation and see what happens. We have the parts list generator open, and this is the support user. There it is. It has populated 5, and it has unchecked the uppercase. It has generated the part numbers. It's copying to the clipboard, and now it's doing the post-processing. And the automation has completed. And so here it is. The parts list file has been uploaded to the storage bucket. And it can be seen that because the support named user was executing this automation, the facility name has been prefixed with UB, and the number of parts that were supposed to be generated by this support user is 5. And then we have the parts list, and we have the timestamp, right? Let's go look at the contents of this file first, and then we'll go back to the assets to make sure that those assets have been consumed correctly, right? So I'm going to download this file. And here it is, UB dash, and this is 8. The parts length is 8. So 2, 4, 6, and 8. And it's from the secondary facilities, the unit B, and the number of parts generated is 5. So let's look at the asset values and make sure that we have, the automation has done its job correctly. I go to assets. And the first asset is going to be part number length. And if I open this, I'm going to resize the windows a little bit so that we have some clarity. Part number length. And if I go down, the support says it has to generate a part number that is 8 characters long, which is what we see here. That's good. So it has done its job correctly in this case. Then we look at the part number type. Support is supposed to generate minor type of parts, which means all lowercase. Good. That's good as well. And then the number of parts per batch is supposed to be 5. That's good. So support has got 5. Excellent. And then finally, we have the unit name. And the unit name is unit B, and that's the prefix that we see here. So good. We have now verified the results of the operation running under the named user support. Now we are going to repeat this test quickly by disconnecting from the UiPath Assistant, and I'm going to be logging in as the admin user, and we'll repeat the test and then take a look at the part number file that's uploaded to the storage bucket. All right, so we are back again from where we left off in the previous demo. I am logged in, through the assistant using the admin username. You can see that it almost looks the same, but if you look at the tenant again, it's the same tenant, but the user is different. If I click on this, it says RVG admin user. The last time it was RPA Vanguard support. So now I am logged in as the admin user, and the admin user has got access to the parts list shipper automation, which is what we're going to execute. And this is the file that was uploaded in the previous test, right? And let's run this automation again and wait for the second parts list file to be generated. $25, the uppercase has been selected. It's generated a lot more part numbers this time. And it's done. Okay. If I refresh the storage bucket, here is the second file. Now this is named differently. Main facility, 25 parts, and the parts list with the timestamp, right? So as usual, I download. And let's open this file. So it goes without saying that this automation has changed its behavior because it's now being run by the admin named user account, right? And if we compare the other file, the previous file, and keep the results side by side, you will see it's the same automation, but the results are markedly different. It has produced 25 parts, right? Given the line number here is 25, or 25 part numbers rather. And each of it has got a length of 4. And because these part numbers are major, they're manufactured at the major facility or the main facility, they're all uppercase. And then they are prefixed with the acronym MF, meaning all these part numbers originated at the main facility, right? Separated by the hyphen. So I hope you find this concept useful in your automations, and you will use it to regulate the outcome of your automations based on the business logic that are required in your processes. So before we end this video, I would like to draw your attention to one thing that I have observed while I have used the asset override feature, and I have brought this to the attention of UiPath. If I go into any of these, overridden assets, right? When we set this up at the beginning, I had said that this username is required, right? So if I edit this asset, for example, you see it says that the username is required, and the value, of course, is required. There's no problem with that, and the machine name is optional. The problem here is if I drop down this drop-down list, I cannot use any groups. You see, I cannot use any groups, or if I say automation, we cannot assign asset overrides at a group level. You can do it at the individual user level, right? So the question becomes, given that this username is required, there's no way to get around the username. What happens if you have like 50 named users having access to this folder, and each of these 50 users needs a different asset value, right? So if we go back to my manufacturing facility example, what happens if I have like 25 manufacturing units, and all 25 manufacturing units have got different part numbers to generate, right? So there is a minor, what you call limitation of scaling this solution. Keep this in mind if you are going to be using asset overrides. If you've got large number of users, that might be a limiting factor, because you have to then put in asset overrides for each of these users that you have in your folder. So if there are 25 users, you got to do this 25 times, right? So what I feel is it would be a good idea to scale this, right? It would be nice if UiPath adds something to override assets by groups, right? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe machine templates, right? If all of those, right? Let's say we have a group of service robots, and service robots don't have the concept of named users, right? They run by machine keys. But if all of those service robots, let's say there are 10 robots at each manufacturing facility, and each of these 10 robots has been assigned a machine template, right? So all robots in one facility use one machine template. All robots in another manufacturing facility uses another machine template. If you could assign these service robots different asset values based on different machine templates, I think that would be a good way to scale this solution, because this is a very good feature, right? But it's limited only to named users right now. Okay? But if we could scale it based on either user groups or machine templates, then we could alter the outcome of our automations by simply configuring the asset values properly. But nonetheless, I hope you find this useful, right? I definitely do. And for limited number of users, I think you still can build pretty good automations that will generate different results based on the users that are running your automations, right? So that is all for this video, and I hope you found this content useful. And if you did, please do like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll truly appreciate that. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.